Hi, everyone. A few weeks ago, I begged your pardon. But this week, as we follow up, I want to see if you could lend me your ear. And here's why. I think the most incredible revelation of 2024 was just how broken our collective moral compass has become. It's not that this is something very new. You see, in 2009, a nationwide survey of 23,000 teenagers ages 13 to 18 reported that nearly 6 out of every 10 respondents said successful people do what they have to do to win, even if it involves cheating. In fact, slightly more than half of those being surveyed admitted to cheating at least once on an exam. Yeah, moral decay was coming. That was only the beginning. In an article entitled Students' Broken Moral Compasses, a high school English teacher, Paul Barnwell, published the results of an informal study of his students as he asked what they would do if their boyfriend or girlfriend committed a felony crime in which other people were seriously harmed. Would or would they not report the incident and turn that person over to the police? Now, one of them said they would, quote, snitch, thereby indicating they had no concern whatsoever about who was being harmed. Their duty, their personal loyalty, was to their friend, and that was the paramount virtue. Do you hear me? Not one. Today, almost 9 years later, those numbers almost parallel results across the country in adults. And an overwhelming number of adults in this country have seen parents cover up or pardon major crimes committed by family members, and instead of being outraged about injustice, they've noted that if in this situation, they would have done the same. Supposed adults have set up love affairs in defense for stone cold murderers. Still others march against the safe return of child and elderly hostages, as word has come in about the terrible conditions that they're being subjected to. It hurts the ears to hear these stories and the arguments of equivocation and legitimization. How does one stand to survive in a society with morals that seem to be failing? Are we simply to accept the absurd as the new normal? Are we supposed to adapt morally in order to survive? I believe the answer is dependent on what you are adapting to and knowing about to what we cannot hear, accept, or allow ourselves to listen to. I'm thinking about being chushim. You know, the Talmud tells us about Bnei Yisrael's trip back to the land of Canaan in order to bury Yaakov in Maras HaMachpelah. It was a significant world event. Yaakov was worried that it wouldn't happen, and so he made his sons, especially the Egyptian viceroy Yosef, swear that they would make it happen. And when he later died, Paro, according to the Mefarshim, was hesitant in letting Yosef fulfill his father's dying wish, but ultimately he relented. He sent Yosef with a large entourage to make sure that he came back. The Canaanites and other world leaders saw the processional and they joined in. Everything went according to plan until, says the Talmud, Esav, Yaakov's brother, showed up to stop the proceedings. Instead of assisting with the burial and sitting shiva for his brother, Esav argued that Yaakov wasn't entitled to the burial spot in Maras HaMachpelah. A major debate ensued, and documentation refuting Esav's claim were found to be left in Egypt. Naphtali, the swiftest among the brothers, was dispatched to Goshen to retrieve the documents, while the other brothers appealed the decision and continued to debate Esav, but to no avail. Hushim, Dan's only child, was hard of hearing and he couldn't understand the holdup. He asked about it and was told of Esav's absurd challenges and that Naphtali was dispatched and hopefully things would work out eventually. And until then, my grandfather needs to be left in a disgraceful manner, he asked. He didn't wait for a response. He took matters into his own hands, and to put it mildly, removed Esav from the situation permanently. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz mentioned the story of the Gemara 3 different times in 3 separate shmuzin that he delivered to the students in Mir within a span of 3 years. Clearly, he felt there was a lot to gain from it because he kept bringing it up. But what was fascinating was at the times it seemed that he derived different lessons from Chushim and the story we just told. You know, in one talk, Rav Chaim wondered about how Avram Avinu was able to handle the Akedah story, while Sarah Imeinu passed away from it in shock. With the penetrating insight, Rav Chaim notes that his taglut, or adaptability, helps a person in tough times. And contrasting his father and uncles with Chushim, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz explained that the brothers and and Dan were able to adapt to the situation and continue to work towards the resolution of and the fulfillment of Yaakov's final burial wishes. But Hushim didn't hear the story and therefore couldn't bear the situation. And similarly, Hashem did a tremendous chesed for Avram Avinu by letting him sink into that which was being asked of him, by letting him to adapt to his situation, as opposed to Sarah Imenu, our matriarch Sarah, who was so shocked by hearing of the episode that she literally passed on because of the spontaneity. The implication, I thought, was that the adapting to that which is overwhelming seems like Hashem wants from what Hashem wants from us. In which case, we need to ask ourselves the obvious question: why is what Hushim did considered admirable? And perhaps the other two references will shed light. You see, in a second shmuz, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz asks why it was Hushim who stepped in and was upset about what was happening to his grandfather. Why didn't the brothers step in to complain about their father? And he explains that the brothers had adapted to the new normal of accepting all that they could do was to open up and to debate. And argue as they may, their enemy was arguing as well. And all that resulted was a constant stalemate. Hushim, he explained, didn't engage in debate. He was mystified, he was dumbfounded, and therefore he reacted. Reb Chaim explains that in life there are things we'll observe and we'll need to be mystified, just like Hushim was. And we'll need to stop and ask a question in order to stop, think, and be inspired. Hushim heard what was going on and stopped the status quo simply by asking if it was really okay, morally, to leave his saintly grandfather's burial bier in the hot weather, until an uncle, swift as he was, would return with a piece of paper from Egypt, a paper that also is likely going to be challenged and rejected by Esav. It begins when a person like Hushim just stops and says to himself, I got to ask myself a simple question. We do the same thing on Seder night. Instead of telling a story uninterrupted that would make a great story, but once we know it already would likely bore us, we encourage people to be involved by using this question and answer format. Even one with no one else at the Seder, says the Gemara, has a responsibility to ask questions. Because when we ask questions, we become inspired to think and to act. Rav Chaim uses Hushim to repeat this idea of asking as part of inspiration to the nation during the Yom Kippur War. In the second of his 6 addresses in the Mir Yeshiva during the opening and the weeks of the war, Rav Chaim cited Hushim again as he implored the people of Yerushalayim, perhaps not directly connected with the battlefields, to ask questions and to check in on soldiers and their families and become inspired to assist and to daven with for the soldiers and their families. Hushim, he's noted, was inspired by the changes and the challenges, and so must we, he said. That inspiration must lead to proper action. So which is it? Are we going to learn to adapt like Avram and the sons of Yaakov? Or is the Hushim response always the way to go? There's a story that appears in this week's Daf Yomi that might offer inspiration. It's about another great Jewish personality, Palti ben Laish. Palti was the husband of Micha bas Shaul, who was given to him by her father Shaul after being promised to David HaMelech. And rather than take his wife and go, Palti took the extraordinary step of asking himself if he wanted to enter the halachic and national debate between King Shaul on the one hand and King David on the other. He took the strong step of placing his sword between him and Michal, not allowing anyone to get close and act inappropriately with her. Rav Chaim explains that while accepting his need to practically adapt to his position between the two kings, Palti experienced what I'd like to call a Hushim moment. He might have needed to adapt to extraordinary circumstances, but he didn't allow the energy of the moment to pass unanswered. While we might not always be able to withstand the corruption of our communal moral compass, we certainly can't simply assess and accept it as status quo. We need to learn to respond, at the very least to ourselves, with internal questions of societal decay, and to be inspired from it, not to accept it. In other words, when we get ready to lend an ear, we need to internally be ready to ask what we're lending ourselves out to hear. And by the way, when we're getting our ears and our moral society back. We will get it back. We are on our way, but we're better off not losing the moral compass in the process. Wishing you and yours a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat Shalom to all.